the job of an investor is not rather just fun. It's all about knowing who you are investing in and doing a lot of other things. I'm sitting today right next to a person who has done this all over the world and succeeded and shown a lot of return to his investors and for himself as well. I'm sitting next to someone called Rajan Anandan. Some of you might know him, but he's absolutely someone you need to really know. Rajan, thank you for joining us today, and it's a pleasure just to be sitting next to you, and thank you for coming on board.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Okay, Rajan, would you mind telling us who you are?
Yeah, so I firstly thank you for having me. It's great to be doing this with you. Look, I grew up in Bambalapititya, before you were born. I grew up in a household. My mother is Sinhalese, Samaravira. Father was Tamil, was an Anandan. And I grew up in this household. My dad was a lawyer turned entrepreneur who loved endurance sport. Swimming the Indian Ocean, standing on one leg, and do all these things. So grew up in a household where, all that was very normal, It's just like every New Year's Eve, he was breaking some new world record. It was a very loving, very athletic household. I was not athletic. So anyway, I grew up, and then because, Anandan is a Tamil name, and we were going through this very intense civil war. 1983 was a very difficult year for the country. My dad unfortunately passed away in 84. He was trying to swim the English Channel, actually. That's how he died. Got hypothermia, where your brain stops working, your body keeps going. And then after that, it was very clear that, at the time, Tamils who could get out, got out. So I went to CIS at the time. It was one of the few international schools. And then thanks to the school, I was able to go to the US. So I went to the US to go to undergrad, went to MIT undergrad, one-way ticket. It's always good to have a one-way ticket, by the way. Focuses your mind, your energy, your soul.
No backup.
I don't wish it on anybody because it's a tough place to be. But it certainly is very focusing. And then, and then I spent 20 years there, went to grad school, worked at McKinsey for a long time, and then I've done a lot of other things, worked in tech many years, been an investor for 6-7 years. But, my values are still the same. It's came from nothing, eventually end up with nothing. When you go, you have nothing. And along the way, I think you just got to do what you're excited about, be very grateful. I come back to Sri Lanka because my mom lives here still. And we'll talk about this, but, I was very active in the startup ecosystem for, more than a decade. But yeah, it's, I drink arak, if that's important. I love matlapan,
It's of course, who doesn't?
Yeah, yesterday I had one here at this restaurant here. It was quite okay and great. Yeah, so that's me.
Interesting. That's quite a journey. So if I may ask you, at MIT, how was your journey there? How did you come? We went from Sri Lanka to MIT, and then from MIT you went on to, I think, Dell, right? So what was that life in MIT? How did you really capture this entire thing where, let's say, a normal Sri Lankan kid from here who goes to MIT, how could that person attain what you have achieved?
Yeah, I think, look, firstly, I didn't know anything about MIT. I'd never gone to the US before I went there. Actually, the only place I'd flown to was I'd been to Chennai a few times because of my dad. And I went to the UK once to attend his funeral. That was it, right? That was my international travel until I landed in the US. I went to MIT because I got into MIT. I didn't know much about MIT. I had a great counselor whom I'm forever grateful for. Was the principals. I went to the Colombo International School, CIS. And so MIT was like, look, basically you go from being top of your class to being totally average because everybody there is just super, super smart. So it's very humbling. You go there and all of a sudden you're surrounded by people who are just literally orders of magnitude smarter than you. And
I think that pushes you, I guess.
Yeah, you should always surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. I mean, I've always believed this. I think everything I've done, I think, I think now I work with probably the smartest people I've ever worked with, in my whole career. So they push you like crazy. It's as I said, right? I went with sort of no return ticket, so it's very clear. I had to graduate. I had to get a job. Actually, after MIT, I went to Stanford. I went to Stanford grad school because I really wanted to experience something new. MIT was Boston. It's very cold. Winters are and it's also like a very, very academically intense place. So I got to Stanford grad school. I went to Stanford. And then after Stanford, I actually worked in McKinsey. I was at McKinsey for 11 years in the Chicago office as a partner in the Chicago office. And I actually went to McKinsey after Stanford because at the time, well, I guess things are similar now again. If you're not a US citizen or you didn't have a green card, it's very hard to get a job, right? So I started mechanical engineering at MIT. I went to Stanford at manufacturing systems engineering. And I really wanted to work in automotive for an automotive company, Ford or General Motors. I mean, at the time, there was a very intense US-Japan manufacturing sort of heated competition globally between these two nations. Much like today, you have, China and the US on everything. At the time, it was manufacturing specific was US-China, US-Japan. But I couldn't get into GM or Ford because, without a citizenship or a green card, they wouldn't even interview you, right? So I only had two options. Either I went into consulting or you go to investment banking. And I was very fortunate. I got an offer from McKinsey in the Chicago office. I joined the Chicago office and I was there for a very long time. So again, look, a lot of my early, I'd say probably both undergrad, grad school, first job, all goes back to no return ticket, no fallback option. There's only one plan. It's called Plan A. It's a good way to live life. If you have lots of options, it's just hard to be laser focused in your mind about what it is you're trying to do. And just having a fallback plan is just a bad idea. And I think today, fortunately for many of you in Sri Lanka, right, it's not bad. It's not bad, right? You're not, hopefully,
Yeah.
I know there's revolutions occasionally here, but it's not a war, right?
Yeah, but it's not
a war. So you're a war, right? It's not like getting blown up and so on and so forth. So that's a good thing, actually. But on the other hand, it's not like this imperative to make it work.
Right. If I were to ask you, how did your first job really change and shape you to who you are? Before we talk about the other ones, which are, but I think everyone knows all these companies, but how did your first job really change?
Yeah, so I mean, look, consulting really teaches you problem solving, right? I didn't have an MBA. So McKinsey at the time hired 20 people globally who didn't have MBAs into their full-time consulting track. Everybody else sort of did a 2-year analyst program, went back to business school. So I was in this group of, sort of non-MBAs. We were sent off to Europe, to Scandinavia, actually, just outside Copenhagen. 30 days you were taught the MBA. So 2-year program was taught to us in 30 days, 7 days a week. I think Sunday afternoon we got off. So it was super intense. Of course, at the end of 30 days, you don't really know much about business, but at least you know more than you did at the beginning of 30 days. So I think you learn how to problem solve, you learn about businesses, you learn how to really dissect a business. You also learn how to be an advisor over time, right? Which is how do you really understand what the company is trying to do and then how do you help them figure out what to do. But the other thing is, you work really hard. In your early days, I worked 7 days a week. There were weeks when I just worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's the other thing, by the way, is especially for these, today I look at some of the younger generation and I think working hard is going to be a competitive advantage. You just work hard. That's it. Just work really hard. You do really well because everybody around you, Sri Lanka has this thing, right? I used to tell my founders in Sri Lanka, right? You have a Sunday buffet concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's really bad. The Sunday buffet, when you're really tired, you ate too much rice, and you have kiribat on Sunday morning, you go to the buffet, and you pretty much lost the whole damn day, right? And so any company that competes against you that actually works on Sunday has an extra 1 full day. So working hard is superpower. So you learn a lot about, I didn't know anything about business, so I learned about business. I learned to solve problems, complex problems very quickly because that's sort of what McKinsey or any consulting firm teaches you. You learn to work really hard because you have to. Otherwise, you're not there. And you're surrounded by people who are extraordinary, right? So again, just culture of excellence, do everything well. I think that's another important thing, right? Always start early in your career. Be in an environment which is excellent, because the only way you learn excellence, you can't learn excellence by reading about it, okay? You learn excellence by being in an environment of excellence. And McKinsey, even today, is excellent, the largest consulting firm in the world, but at the time it was elite. It was very elite, in a good way, right? Meaning they hired the best people, they worked them really hard, they did incredible work for clients, worked like crazy. And that creates a culture of excellence, right? And that's what I always look for, that, which is like, is this a culture of intense culture of excellence?
Yeah. So excellence and working hard is the key.
Yeah. Working hard today, especially, you work really, really hard, you're going to win.
Yeah.
I am 100% convinced, because most people aren't. You just outwork them. Yeah. I mean, I tell my daughter who's 20, just all you have to do is just outwork. And it can be done because most people around you aren't working that hard.
It's very true.
Yeah, just work hard. That's it, really. You guys are working hard. It's a Saturday. It's Saturday at 5:30 p.m., right? All your peers are probably out and doing swimming or playing soccer or cricket or maybe getting ready to party or whatever. And you guys are here like doing a podcast. That's a good thing.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, moving on to my next question. I think a lot of Sri Lankan, there are people who can say, I worked at Dell, I worked at Microsoft, and I worked at Google, but I don't think anyone can say I led them. Can you tell me about your, how you started at Dell and then moved on to something even more greater, Microsoft, and even more greater than Google? Can you just run us through?
Yeah, first of all, look, I did lead these companies, right? Okay. Michael Dell runs Dell. He was the founder and CEO of Dell. I led parts of the businesses over time. Similarly with Microsoft, I ran the Microsoft India business. With Google, I ran Google in India and Southeast Asia, and Google, so I just want to be clear.
Not the full one. I also went out and kills.
Because, like, the CEO of the company runs the company, right? Look, I think, I left McKinsey because I wanted an operating role. I wanted to kind of learn how to really drive execution. And that was great. So I went to work for Michael. Michael Dell is the founder of Dell. I worked for him. Every few years, he'd hire a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG partner, come in to work with them. And the whole idea was to actually very quickly find a operating role. So actually the way I ended up in India, because I was leading a bunch of large global offshore ops type things, early days of offshoring, IT, call centers, things like that. And I was running parts of that business. So I ended up in India temporarily. My wife Radhika was born in India, but grew up in the US, New York and New Jersey. We met in college, but she had family in Delhi. So I was sort of doing stuff around all over Asia. So I moved to Delhi, and then I basically ended up running the Dell India business. It was a small business. It's $200 million. When it took it over 8 quarters later, it was $800 million of revenue. And then after that, I actually decided to leave Dell because I wanted to be more on the East Coast or India. So I ended up then in Microsoft, and then it was just that was probably another interesting career lesson, which is like, there are great opportunities that show up, just take them. Yeah. People tend to overanalyze,
just go for it.
No, I mean, yeah, and just because it may not come around again, right? And
Can you tell me a little bit more on Microsoft and Google, and how you actually running Google in India and Southeast Asia is something for me is actually a big role. Can you explain that a little bit to me, how a layman would understand it in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, look, Google's business, now it's much more complex. At the time, look, Google, the internet was still nascent in India. There were, less than 100 million internet users. Today, there's 900 million. Google's business is very simple. They have a bunch of consumer internet products. So what you have to do is make sure that a large number of consumers use these consumer internet products. And then you monetize through advertising. Now they have different ways. Right? They have a large cloud business and so on. They have a very nascent cloud business. So as the business leader for the region, right? So you want to basically drive revenue. So the Google business, when I took over in India, had about $90 million of revenue. When I left, was $2.5 billion of revenue. Southeast Asia at the same time, if you add both up, they were in the $4 or $5 billion type business range. So what you have to do is, now you can't get the revenue if your products don't have penetration, right? So you have to have strategies to increase penetration of, search has to be used by large hundreds of millions of Indians, YouTube has to be, and so on and so forth. So there's a product strategy, which is generally driven by the product teams globally, but has the regional team, you have to make sure that, the right things are being done. And then you build out a kick-ass sort of go-to-market team, right? Sales, marketing, partnerships, business development to go drive revenue. So, when I started, the entire digital ad market, and Google makes money from digital advertising. Now there are many other revenue streams like cloud. But digital advertising was the only real revenue stream for Google in India. And the entire digital ad market was $140 million. Google had 90 million of it. And we set a goal to say, look, we want to get to, I think it was 750 million or maybe $1 billion in 4 years. I think we said $1 billion in 4 years. We got there in 5 years. So basically we said, we set a goal to get the digital ad, our business to $1 billion when the whole market was only 140 million. And what it took was to move revenue from television and print. So you have to come up with strategies, right? How do you convince advertisers to, because it was very early days of digital. So it's a classic sort of market making P&L role, right? And it requires a lot of, you got to build out go-to-market teams, sales, marketing, partnerships. You got to be out in the market. You got to call on CEOs, CMOs. You got to do a lot of stuff to, go from 90 million to 5 billion.
Interesting, very interesting. So coming to the present, right now you are managing director at Peak 15, which is part of Sequoia Capital, formerly known as Sequoia Capital, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so this is an independent firm.
Okay.
Sequoia had 3 businesses, US, China, and India. 3 years ago, the China and the India businesses became independent. So Peak 15 is the former Sequoia India and Southeast Asia team. But we are now fully independent. It's an independent global firm. We have the same India team that leads the firm. We have the same set of companies. We have $10 billion under management. We have 500 active companies. We have over 50 unicorns in our portfolio. We've taken 36 companies public, and we invest from very early seed through growth, right? So we can invest $500,000 or $1 million or $5 million. We can also invest $100 million into a company. And before we became Peak 15, when we were Sequoia India and Southeast Asia, we only invested in India and Southeast Asia, which is, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. But after we become independent, we are much more global in scope, but with deep roots in India and Asia, right? So we continue to invest very actively in India. India is our core market. We're also very active in Singapore, Australia, other parts of Asia. And then we've also started very selectively investing in the US. So in fact, maybe about 6 weeks ago, we launched an office in San Francisco, where we have several operating partners. We have a couple of full-time investors. So that's sort of and by the way, Peak 15 is the 15th peak in the range. It's what Mount Everest is.
Okay.
So Peak 15 is basically Mount Everest. That's sort of so I'm one of the partners. It's a partnership. And I focus mostly on early stage investments. Our seed platform is called Surge, where we invest up to $5 million per company. We also have a full-time investment team that works with these companies, but they have a company building immersion. So think of it as for our founders to learn about what it takes to build amazing companies and so on and so forth. So Surge is the external term that we use for our approach to doing seed stage investing. So I spend most of my time doing that.
Okay, very interesting. So I think that covered like the entire of who Rajan is. I actually wanted to come back to your roots in Sri Lanka. I know that you were one of the first people to get the Indian Angel Network down here and then help Prajit also set up everything here. And can you just give me a rundown on that, like how you did that and what it is standing today as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, basically the war ended in 2009 and I was quite keen to do something to give back. I'm from here, I'm Sri Lankan. And one thing I knew was technology and angel investing. I'd been an angel investor even up at that point. So Prajit had came back to Sri Lanka. We grew up together, and he had come back to turn around the family business, turn it around. I think he had exited his company. I can't remember exactly around the time. And so Prajit and I said, look, why don't we just start angel investing? We'll just invest our own capital, okay? And so we said, okay, let's sort of say we are going to invest, and then nothing happened because there were no startups. And that's when we decided to launch Venture Engine. So we got Indian Angel Network. We moved to India my wife and I moved to India in 2005. In 2006, I joined Indian Angel Network because angel investing was very early even then, right? And so because IAN had seen 5-6 years of ecosystem development. So we got Padmaja and the IAN team to help. And first thing we did was we launched the venture engine as a concept, because then it was really done to create a pipeline, because, you can't be investing in companies. There are no companies to invest in.
Yes.
And nobody knew what a startup was, and nobody knew that, you could take equity and not like have debt. So that was 2000 and I think 10 or 11. And then for first year or two, nothing happened because there were no companies, and we launched venture engine. Praji would have all the data details. And then we started angel investing, and we had 15, 16 companies of our own capital we invested in. Mostly companies that came out of venture engine, companies like OMAC and Zigzag and so on and so on. And Roar, for instance. Then I think 2016 or 17, we realized that a bunch of our companies were doing well, but there was no follow-on capital, right? Sri Lanka was too small for the Indian venture capitalists to really care about. So we said, okay, why don't we launch a small venture fund? And that's when we created the first venture fund. The first Blue Ocean Ventures was really our capital. It was like a prop cap vehicle, Praji and my capital. And then we launched the first venture fund. We raised external capital. That was fund one. And then the second fund we created with Dialogue. It was called Digital Innovation, DIF, Digital Innovation Fund. And then after I joined Sequoia and Peak 15, I couldn't really be GPs in two funds. So Praji continues to lead that, and now Praji's launching a third fund. So yeah, that's the journey. But it was all focused on like essentially trying to, build a local ecosystem. I don't know. I assume most people know this here, but for many years, Google runs something called Google Summer of Code. It's like a competition for computer science, for basically developers. And, Morotua University had the highest number of winners in this Google Summer of Code for many years running. And that basically said, look, we have the talent, we have the coding talent, we have the tech talent. We just have to create enough opportunities, get people inspired, and then give them enough capital, give them some capital to get started, right? And that was a simple idea when we started. I guess now it's been 15 years. So that's the journey that we kind of embarked on.
Interesting. One thing that I wanted to ask is actually a comparison, right? If you take a scale of 1 to 10, if India is right now at 10, where do you see Sri Lanka standing at? I just want to add something also into this context. Last year, Sri Lanka jumped 64 points on the Startup Genome Index, which is the biggest jump in the world. So I know that we are in Sri Lanka, that the startup movement is just flowing right now. But from your context, where do you see it? What needs to be changed?
Yeah, I think, look, it's hard to compare because, one country is, like 1.4 billion people, $4 trillion economy, has 140 unicorns, has very vibrant public market, and so it's not really comparable. Sri Lanka is not that, right? Like 23 million people. Yes. NCR, National Capital Region, which is Delhi, has more people than all of Sri Lanka, right? So, it's not really, it's not really fair to even compare. Look, I think Sri Lanka is still very early, but I think it's taken longer than I would have liked, primarily because I think we just had so many setbacks. There was a time when we had 2 prime ministers, and then there was a time we had no prime ministers. Yeah. Stuff keeps happening, like then there was COVID, which happened to, everybody around the world. So I think there've been a bunch of different setbacks which haven't been great. But I would say, look, I think so far, the good news is there have been a bunch of companies handful of companies that you can really point to, like just within our portfolio, right? We had a company called Insure Me that's public in the local stock exchange. There was a company called Nsinga that was acquired. It was a very, very good exit for the first fund that we raised. Actually raised, returned 35% of our first fund within like a few years of investing in the company. And there are a bunch of other examples. And then, if you look at not our portfolio, we issue investors in companies like PicMe, which has done very well, right? And I think the iconic company of Sri Lanka is WSO2. It's a company that was founded, a few decades ago. But I think, if Sri Lanka could have 10 Sanjeevers, I think like the nation on the map. So I would say where the country is, it's got the inherent potential of, in many ways, the original thesis that we had 15 years ago, Praji and I, it very much still holds today. In fact, it probably holds even more today with AI because, this technical talent is very good. I think there are a few early winners, which is good because, people always want role models. I do think where the gaps today are, there's still a very big gap in capital, right? I mean, like I think there's like one venture capital fund in the country, right, which is like the same venture capital fund that was around for like 8 years. But I think government's I think strategy now to have a fund of funds, I think that is super critical. I think it's absolutely critical that this fund of funds being put in place. I think it's very important also for local investors to, I think that's where land is actually a very important enabler, right? Because local investors have to support the sort of get the ecosystem going. And I think anything that can be done on more capital market reforms, because see, for investors, you invest in a company, but then you want to exit the company, right? You can only exit like one or two ways. Either you take a company public or you sell it to a strategic. Now, as an early stage investor, you can have a late stage investor acquire a position. Strategics, in Sri Lanka, there aren't really that many strategics. So I think the public market, like in India, by the way, the IPO market is so vibrant for startups. That's been a huge change to the Indian ecosystem, right? Just last year, our firm, we had 6 IPOs, right? 2 of them were $10 billion market cap companies. We had 5 IPOs in 5 weeks. I mean, it's nuts. Nowhere in the history of the world has ever been like 5 IPOs in 5 weeks, one firm, right? Now, it's not repeatable because, we obviously have been investing for 20 years in companies. But I think capital market reform. So I would say, I think the underlying potential is very strong. I think there's some good early examples, but a lot of work needs to be done. So I think the work that you guys are doing at LAN, I think the work that the government is doing, trying to create fund of funds, change some of the tax regimes, right? Because they're not very friendly to venture capital firms. And I think the last thing I would say is I think Sri Lankans just need to start up more. I just got to be more audacious to start companies, especially the technical talent, right? As well as non-technical talent. I mean, there's so much opportunity, whether it's in food or whether it's in agriculture, value added, whether it's in, solar is like a massive opportunity, right?
Yeah. I just want to ask one thing from your perspective. What would you tell an investor in the Lankan Angel Network currently who are there, what to look for? What do you look for when you're investing in a company? What sort of is it a founder or is it a team?
Yeah.
Or it's full team or just the founder or, just what?
Yeah, I think as a seed stage, as an angel investor, when you invest at, let's say, a seed, either you're just investing in a founder with an idea or maybe there's some product that's built very early. It's all about the founder, okay? It is 100% about the founder. So if you got a back founder you think is going to build a great company, they're relentless, they're not going to give up, they're going to keep pivoting, they're going to find a product market fit, etc. But I would say in Sri Lanka, you do need to have the market lens because it's a small market, right? And as an investor, it's one thing to invest, right? But at the end of the day, you don't make any gains until the thing exits, until you're able to exit the company. So it's very important to sort of think through the market, say, is the market large enough to either build a company that is going to go public? So there could be an InsureMe, right? Which is, it's not a big company, but, it's at a very good IPO. Or, it's in a market that's strategic where you could have an acquisition, right? So you can either the idea is where you're building for the Sri Lankan market or you're building a global regional kind of company, right? Like Nsinga was a global company product that was acquired, a software product. So you got to look at both. But I always over-index, you've got to over-index on the founder because you can have an okay founder in a great market or you can have a great founder in an okay market. Our, view is ideally you want both because, but between the two, just over-index. Because, great founders also find a way to find a good market, right? Because they're constantly evolving and pivoting and iterating and so on.
Interesting. That's actually quite good advice, I would say. I think I've talked to you in the last couple of days of what sort of an event that I'm hosting with the Lankan Angel Network and WUSC, who's sponsoring us. Can you tell me whether this will impact our investors, how it will help? And I think I've told you what this event will entail, a masterclass and a session in terms of a panel discussion with some of the government top senior people and also some of the investors. And then having all these MOUs signed to really kick off certain collaborations in terms of supporting entrepreneurship. Do you think this event will be important?
Yeah, look, I think the more awareness building that you can do, I think the better it is because, you should have, sort of almost like catalyze the, in entrepreneurs in India, Sri Lanka, who are pretty established, larger companies, to do more of this, right? I don't know already, Lankan Angel Network has a large membership. But the reality is, if you only invest in 2 or 3 companies, very likely it won't work, right? This angel investing thing is a portfolio game. Unless you have 10 or 20 investments, right? You're not going to find that one outlier company that's going to hit it. A lot of angels, mistake they make is they make 2, 3 investments, none of them work, and then they say the asset class is pretty terrible. That's actually not a great strategy, So this is not like buying public equities, because a lot of startups actually go to zero, right? So you're looking for that power law company. So I think just building the awareness about how this model works, capability building, I think one is awareness, just building more awareness. And I do think to a lot of established businesses in Sri Lanka, established entrepreneurs should do this because it's actually important for the nation. And if you live here, you should do something for your nation. You know what I mean? And this, entrepreneurship is going to be one of the single most important things for Sri Lanka to go from where it is today to, a developed economy over some period of time. But second, you can't just have awareness, but, you got to have capability. How does this really work? Like simple thing, which is like, what do you look for? Do you look for talent? Do you look for the idea? Simple thing. Like if you only make 3 investments, most likely you're not going to make it work, right? Simple things for corporates, right? Is don't take majority interest. Like all corporates want to have more than 50%. That's a really bad idea because by definition, you're not attracting great founders, right? Great founders want to build their companies. They don't want to build your company, right? Like if you have control, let's say you take 60% of a startup, okay, as a corporate, through your investment, effectively what you're saying is that person works for you, i.e. they've kind of joined whatever your company XYZ is, right? Great entrepreneurs don't want to do that. Great entrepreneurs want to build their company and they want you to help with financing and help in strategy and so on. So I think capability is very important. And the third one is enabling, right? Like, so the government, given where Sri Lanka is today, if the government doesn't make some big moves, Sri Lanka will never achieve its potential. That's pretty obvious in everything, right? Like, just to give you a sense, India earlier this year approved $11 billion to invest directly into deep tech startups. Okay, $11 billion. It's $2.5 billion a year. Over 11 billion, by the way, over 5 years. It was 1 lakh crore, so it's about, call it 11 billion. So 2.5, let's call it 2.2 billion a year over 5 years. And they have in the last 4 months approved almost $300 million into 30 companies. That's how quickly, it's moving, right? Because it's all very focused on deep tech, because India is very, very focused now on becoming self-reliant in areas like semiconductors, space tech, energy, new energy, AI infrastructure, AI models, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very important. Now, of course, Sri Lanka, given the size of the economy, can't invest billions of dollars, but it's very important to get this fund off the ground, to change the tax regime so that you can actually have venture vehicles, vehicles that actually make sense, right? So I'd say for all 3 of those reasons, long answer, but like super important event. I'm glad you're doing it. Sorry, I can't be there.
Yes, I know. I invited you I think a month back, but you just told me that you can't. But that's fine.
But here we are. We're doing the preview to that.
Yes. So Rajan, thank you so much for actually coming here, right? I really appreciate it. And since you can't make it to the event, you agreed to this, and then I'm really grateful. And I think this would really help the investors to see what someone who does investing like you in a much larger scale understand, how to do that in Sri Lanka and how to take companies global.
Yeah.
So,
the last thing I'd add is, see, so far, we haven't seen the huge outcomes, but once the startup ecosystem really gets going, right, the most successful angel investors will make 100x, will make a 200x, and sometimes 1,000x on your capital invested, right? So I think if you're really, really good, and you have luck, but in the right ecosystem, you can really make phenomenal returns. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. It's an illiquid asset class. It goes for a long time. You've got to have a large portfolio of companies, but I'd probably end with that. Because, sometimes you can look at I always say, right, you can look at the last 10 or 15 years and you try to forecast the future. When it comes to technology and startups, that's like the worst thing you can do, because everything's changing very rapidly, right?
Yes.
But thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. Cheers. Thank you so much.